Hello. So during these sessions, we've been hearing a lot about cryptocurrencies and blockchain and financial services, and it seems to have been really the sort of hot order of the day. But the blockchain itself is a very interesting, or blockchains are a very interesting form of technology. And our panel here is going to talk about other implementations of the blockchain, not just in fintech. So quickly, they're going to introduce themselves in sort of one sentence explanations, and then we'll delve into the topic. So Hugh?
So I'm Hugh Halford-Thompson, co-founder and Chief Innovation Officer for BTL Group, and we built out an enterprise blockchain platform called Interbit.
Hi, my name is Kush Patel. I'm the CEO and founder of TallySticks. TallySticks is aiming to address the trade finance market. It's a very large market. I know a lot of banks are addressing it, but our thinking is that it's so large that there's room for more than one player.
Hi everyone, I'm Gabrielle. I co-founded a blockchain company called Epiphyte. Epiphyte specialized in international payments using blockchain as invisible rails. I'm a lawyer by training, and I lead the conversation at the International Bar Association on blockchain technologies.
Anthony Woolley from SocGen. Amongst various things I do, I'm responsible for engaging the fintech ecosystem with SocGen. When I started doing that 2.5 years ago, I quickly discovered blockchain and then distributed ledger technology. So I manage research teams and our program on distributed ledger.
So Hugh, what are the major uses of blockchain beyond financial services?
So there's obviously a lot in financial services, a lot of which has been covered today as well. But where we've been focused more recently is also working with companies like BP, like ENI, Veen Energy, and various others, both oil players and gas players in the energy sector in Europe. And they are looking at this from a back office perspective, looking at how can they transform their processes, how can they transform the way that, not the way that they're, specifically the way that they're trading and doing the exchange part of it, but more what's that post-trade processes, how do you deal with all the disputes, all the reconciliation issues that they currently have. So at a high level, if I do a trade with you, I put my trade in my system, in my ETRM, you put it in your system, in your ETRM. There's a whole load of back and forth where we go through the various disputes on the trade. We make sure that we're reconciled, we've got exactly the same parameters. Then we generate an invoice, send it back and forth again. There's a lot of security issues around that piece as well. And the concept is really, if we put in a blockchain in between us, then you've got a single shared space between you. That's one logical system. It's like having a virtual machine or a single platform where you can put that data, so there's not going to be any reconciliation issues. You can pull disputes right up to source, and in a lot of cases eliminate them entirely, rather than just working, seeing them when the invoice comes out and having to deal with all that. And then you can generate, you can move a lot of the processes, like generating the invoice, for example, onto that shared environment. So there's a lot of interest there. We're also working. We've done some work in the gaming sector. We've done some work again in the energy sector in the operations space. So looking at how gas traders can effectively again remove disputes and remove reconciliation issues between the various gas terminals throughout Europe and the North Sea, and also the same sort of equivalent in the US.
So Kush, which areas are of interest to you outside blockchain, outside financial services?
Look, there's a lot of things you can do outside of financial services with blockchain. I mean, you got things like voting, you've got things like improving logistics, what have you. The one thing that I wanted to say about it's the crux of blockchain, but it doesn't really focus on the financial transactions part of it. And that's identity management, right? For any blockchain solution, the crux of any blockchain solution is actually identifying or matching an identity of an individual first to the organization, if it's a corporate environment, to the organization on which they're transacting on behalf of, or as well as trying to tie both the identity of the individual as well as that organization to a cryptographic or a key pair, right? And if you cannot tie a digital, let's say, signature or a digital identity to a real world identity, you really, then something like the blockchain isn't gonna give you the benefits that you're looking for, right? The reason that you have the immutability, the reason that you have the trust environment is because you know exactly who's doing what, and the fact that that when parties are held accountable, they tend to follow the rules of the road or the rules of the game, right? So that's the one thing I wanted to add about something outside of financial services relating to blockchain.
And Gabrielle, which particular areas interest you?
A lot. I think, as Kush is saying, there are non-legal and legal areas that interest me. So the example that Kush is giving about distribution of aid very fastly, very cheaply. For me, the true utility of blockchain technology is its ability for systems to be interoperable, for them to speak to each other in a very fast and cheap way, and to easily prove these events. So that program of distributing aid to refugees occurring now in real life, where they can use cryptographically unique vouchers to obtain food from grocery stores against verification by digital ID and eye scanning is a very significant real-world example of how the technology is being used outside of financial services. There are other models which I find very interesting, as you were seeing in the gaming space. New models are emerging. Again, the ability of the technology to allow for peer-to-peer transactions naturally means that large players will be disintermediated. So the fact that you could have independent or small game developers connect directly to their users, their players, without having to go through a large distribution platform is fantastic, because it cuts the cost and it gives them control over their own games. Another aspect, for example, is on the gambling side, new types of models which are allowing for player payment using digital assets like Bitcoin or Ether. So the Isle of Man actually reminded me today, their Gambling Supervisory Commission, that they are actually licensing companies now. It's no longer academic as in 2012. They have an Ethereum-based lottery system and another type of peer-to-peer platform. So that's another interesting space. On the non-legal side, in my opinion, the actual legal profession will be disrupted, because here you have a system which can quickly and easily prove events without dispute. So you're looking at different types of arbitration, smart contract functionality, which will evolve or transform the area of practice of contract law and how contracts are executed. You also have different types of legal areas, such as any type of area where time stamping and proving of facts is of critical importance. So evidence. Normally, if you want to sue someone, there's a long process, a pretrial process, where you have to engage in discovery. Discovery means that you and I have to trade different documents to demonstrate to the court that I've shown you this evidence and you've shown me this evidence. This strings out the litigation process. So here you have a technology where those documents can be exchanged almost instantaneously in a very short period of time and will almost shrink the litigation timeline. I go on, but I'll stop there.
So, Anthony, what sort of properly functioning uses of the blockchain have you seen?
A big one out there is public cryptocurrencies, actually. No, what I want to say is in 2015, we were discussing use cases. I don't think those use cases have really changed. I think what you can or could use blockchain for is pretty well understood, whether it's proof of existence, notarization, whether it's to help us reduce costs in the back office of financial services. Obviously, I'm looking outwards from financial services for this panel. You know, people have talked for a long time about the supply chain and how it's going to transform the supply chain. I think the point that's relevant saying is that 2 years later in 2017, there's a lot of energy and there's a lot of things going on, but the reality is that the amount of production implementations supported by business cases that are out there with sleeves rolled up, being used in anger every day is incredibly small. I hedge myself by saying incredibly small, right? And the reason for that is because infrastructure is being built, right? Blockchain is basically, or distributed ledger is an infrastructure. It needs to be built. It needs to be built from a technology point of view, and there's some evolution to be done there to adapt it to these use cases. Whether use cases when, if we talk outside financial services, I think we're less talking about the public blockchains, right? We're talking about blockchains where entities are known, where you need the right privacy scalability. So the technology is being adapted to that, and that takes a little bit of time. And it's not just the technology, it's putting in place the common interests, the networks, everything that's required to support the business interests of putting those in place. That's happening. You see every week, you'll see consortia saying we did a production transaction on this, or we have a production application for that. But actually getting those structures up and running properly is a process that's ongoing. I think you'll see it happening, and you'll see it happening in areas like supply chain. I mean, from sitting inside a bank and we look outside, say, through our trade finance businesses and onwards, that's where there's a lot of activity going on at the moment. I think it's going to be a bit messy how it comes to fruition because you've got a lot of different interests, many consortia. But that's a particular space to watch. I think Hugh's, operating in a supply chain use case with the electrical companies he's working with, right?
So I've done more of the gas side, but absolutely same companies.
And how have you found that sort of, because you've been quite focused on the energy sector, and how has that worked?
Well, it's worked really well. So we've been focused, on financial services as well. We've done a lot of work with Visa and various banks, and some of that's still ongoing. But in the energy sector, if you sort of go back to September, most of the energy companies in Europe still didn't really know what blockchain was. They were starting to take a look at it. You were obviously already involved in a project there, but there wasn't that much going on. Now there's I can't count the number of blockchain for energy companies, startups that are out there and have been doing it for years. And there's a much better understanding now of where it's gonna fit in for these different companies. They are playing catch up a certain amount with financial services. In the US, we're working out there as well, and the energy companies in the US are, for the most part, not all of them for sure, but for the most part, they're a few months behind in terms of understanding compared to their European counterparts. But what we found is that they're looking at very, very similar use cases where we're trying to get rid of reconciliation between different counterparties, where you've got internal structures, internal trading between different entities, and internal reconciliation issues. Again, you can put in a blockchain to get rid of a lot of that. But we're also finding we're going a step further than that, and with pretty much every client we've worked with, there's interest in doing purely internal projects. And when I say internal, so as well as all the consortium side, when I say internal, I don't mean just dealing with different legal entities, subsidiaries, and departments. I mean building a single system on a blockchain. So when you when we built out Interbit, when we built out our blockchain platform, we found that when you build an enterprise system, you need to build the application logic, which is very much defined by the business. You need the UI again, or how you interact with that, again defined by the business. There's a certain amount of DevOps, getting the machines up and running, and then there's a huge amount of work in audit, in security, in persistence, in backups, redundancy, and all the things that you need to make a system, a computer system, resilient. So whether it's resilient to attack, resilient to failure, to power cuts, to whatever it is. And when you're talking about some of these multi-counterparty approaches, you're looking at a lot of things that you can't do without blockchain. But people are also starting to look at what can you do better, cheaper, faster. So if you're building a system on Interbit, you've got effectively it's like having a server that you're deploying to, but it's actually run on on 5, 10, 15 servers, however many you want, and you've got that resilience, you've got that audit built in, you've got all these different pieces. So you just need to focus on the business logic. And that can reduce for the developers out there, reduces the lines of code by between 60 and 90%, depending what you're building. And in terms of effort for building and maintaining it, and maintaining a system long term, that again translates into similar types of cost savings. So there's a lot of, and it can also make you more nimble as an IT organization, so you can bring things to market quicker. So yeah, there's a lot of different areas people are looking, and I would say a big sort of section of that is the group things, the consortium things, and the interdepartment, intercompany things. But then there's this other piece, which is what can you do at the very best, and there's always winners and losers within it. But when you're doing a consortium thing, for the most part of them, everybody's either gaining or saving the same amount. And if you want to get a leg up on your competition, if you want to, if you want to get a competitive advantage over people, that's where building internal systems can really provide that extra revenue.
Obviously, we've got a great panel here. So if anyone has any questions, just sort of, is there a hand going up? No. But if anyone does...
I'd like to throw out a question to the audience. By show of hands, how many people here think they understand what a blockchain is? Okay, that's a lot.
Notice I didn't put my hand up. Yeah.
Okay, so for those of you who may not understand, I'll try, and then maybe the technical people could give a better substantiation. It's a distributed or decentralized network which allows all of us to validate a transaction together. It doesn't mean that we understand specifically what the transaction is, but we could see that a transaction has occurred. And the reason why people keep talking about it is because it's distributed and it's peer-to-peer like the internet. It means that we don't need a centralized party like a financial institution or a bank or insurance company to validate that transaction. And that's why people keep talking about it, because of the potential disintermediation and the fact that transactions could occur quicker and faster.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that. I think, well, to implement this stuff, you need a network effect, right? And that's what everybody's trying to overcome at the moment. And I think there are three types of networks that they're pulling together. One is commercial, where either there's an interest in a group of entities making money or saving costs, right? One is sovereign, right? So it's countries who want to establish these infrastructures, maybe to help the administration of their government go electronic. And actually, the last one is philanthropic, which actually Gabriella made a reference to, where you've got people trying to do common good. So ID 2020 is an excellent example of that, where giving refugees identity. It's also an excellent use case because, as Kush said, to start this off, you need an agreed definition of identity. And that's also where some of the messiness comes with these initiatives. You look at commercial initiatives, all the entities in the network need to agree common identity standards that may be not there, so they have to overcome those hurdles. ID 2020, the identity problem is the problem, right? So actually they get the chance to solve the problem of identity of refugees, and maybe that will drive a standardization. But even that's a prototype, right? And that'll take a little while to go into production. So I think ultimately, at the moment, you've got these different networks pulling together. They need to have the business case, even whether that's philanthropic business case, and then that will drive the outcomes around identity, around supply chains, around proof of existence, etc.
How do you go about sort of building a blockchain beyond financial services? What sort of technologies are you using?
So I think it kind of goes back to the definition of a blockchain as well, and the when you describe that, you use the word transaction a lot, and that draws a lot of people. It doesn't always have to be a financial transaction, obviously, but it draws a lot of people towards that. And to me, it's like putting a computer in the middle of the room where anyone who's part of that blockchain can see what's happening on that system. So what can you do on that computer is the question. Well, what can you do on the internet? It was email, then became a whole load of things. In terms of the technology that we're using, we built out Interbit in-house, so it's our own blockchain platform that we developed from the ground up. It's built in JavaScript. The smart contracts, the applications on top are run in JavaScript again, so that gives easier maintenance support, gives quicker development. In terms of around cryptography, there's a lot of security technologies that get thrown into the mix. But yeah, really, it's applying a lot of the existing technology to a new type of architecture, which can either solve new types of business cases, or create new types of business cases, or provide efficiencies in things that you could do in other ways, but they're more efficient with this type of system.
So you mentioned how you build a blockchain system from a technical perspective. But there's also the commercial perspective, right? And how do you drive, or how do you get customer engagement? How do you drive or build that network effect, right? And I think what we learned over the past, I don't know, maybe about 10, 15 years, is that social media has taught us a great amount of information as to how to build a network, right? Today, when you look at building a blockchain network, you might have a couple of parties hosting the system. Well, that's, one of the benefits of blockchain is security, and if you only have a couple of nodes, that's not a very secure system. So the more parties that you have onto a system, obviously the more secure the solution should be.
Depending on what you're doing with it.
Depending on what you're doing, yeah. So how do you drive all that customer adoption? And it's social media, right? Or social media gives you the insights. If I am working, I'm going to give a plug this time. So if you're doing trade finance and you have an importer and you have an exporter, let's suppose neither party's on the blockchain system. So you go to a bank, right? And the bank says, or let's suppose I'm the importer. I go to a bank and I say, look, I want a LC. And the bank turns around and says, okay, well, the way that we're going to give you this LC is that you have to sign up for this system. Now, they'll send out a link, just like you might get from like a friend invite or what have you. But they'll send out an invite. You go through an onboarding process. You've onboarded yourself. But one of the other things that the bank would have known is who your counterparty is. So they would have also sent a link out to your counterparty to onboard them. Now you've got two parties who aren't on the blockchain system who are onboarded. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have to host the node, right? There's all different ways that they can operate off the blockchain system. For example, the bank could have hosted the node. A service provider could have hosted the node. It could have been a whole lot of different ways that you access the blockchain system. But the protocols are the same. You have to sign up for your identity. We have to tie your identity to a key pair, and that key pair sort of represents not only you, but your organization, what have you, right? But this is how you get different parties, whether it's a freight forwarder, whether it's your bank, whether it's a counterparty bank, whoever it is, this is how you get them onto the system. So you answer the question from a technical perspective, but if you're looking at it from a commercial perspective, this is one way of doing it.
If I say trade finance is a really interesting space, right? And people have been trying to make it electronic for the last 20, 30 years. And actually, from a technical point of view, it's one of the simplest industries to make electronic. It hasn't gone electronic because you've got a very complex ecosystem of different parties around the world, different interests, and there just hasn't been the trust to enable that to happen. Now, with what's happening at the moment, you've still got to have a commercial structure, right? When we talk about decentralization, if you've got known parties, at minimum, they're known, they're legally known. And so the one thing that you have to have in the middle, at minimum, is a lawyer. You'll probably have a bit more than a lawyer, because you probably have a lawyer and a commercial entity running some sort of network. But how you achieve that network effect and how you achieve that balance of trust, you can do at different levels. So in trade finance, you could have banks that build a trade finance blockchain and say everybody use it. Maybe that's not diverse enough in terms of the stakeholders. Maybe the shipping companies will do it, or the port authorities. Actually, what's happening in trade finance is you need enough of the ecosystem across all of the main players, from banks to port authorities, etc., to come together with enough critical mass to create this environment. Once you've got that, a network effect, then the technology provides a level of insurance that everybody's got control over their own data. And that's the punchline, really. And what's behind all of these use cases, and a much broader theme in this whole space, is it's about people taking control of their data. Controlling where it is, controlling where it goes, and not being charged for your own data, which is what happens a hell of a lot, especially if you're a bank. we're not here to talk about financial services, but we provide our data to a lot of people and they charge us for taking it, they aggregate it, and then they charge us for taking it back again. So this whole space, without financial services, about people taking control of data into a network where you balance a level of trust, not mistrust, but a necessarily distributed trust between different entities that might have slightly different commercial interests and priorities.
Can I just add to that? So one of the difficulties in the trade finance sector is that the legal components and the underlying legal documents are fractured. They're designed by jurisdiction and they don't sync with each other. So to my mind, the blockchain conversation really triggers a wider conversation of streamlining processes generally, especially and including in the legal profession. So this is the point I was trying to make before, where I personally see a shift to a simplified and universal legal system on the one hand. I'll give an example. So I am barred in New York. I'm barred in, sorry, am I running out of time? Okay, sorry. I talk offline.
But I think it's been a great panel and a great final point, Gabrielle. So thank you very much to the panel.